This happened 3 winters ago during a camping trip in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. My friend Mark and I had planned the trip for months. We both worked office jobs in Denver, and every now and then we liked getting away from the city. Just trees, mountains, silence. At least, that's what we expected. The trail we chose was supposed to be quiet. Not one of the big national park spots full of tourists. This was a smaller forest area a few hours west of the city. The kind of place where cell signal disappears 20 minutes after you leave the highway. We left early on a Friday morning. The drive took about 3 hours, winding through mountain roads and pine forest that seemed to stretch forever. Snow still covered parts of the ground, especially in the shaded areas between the trees. The air up there felt colder, heavier, but the sky was clear and the forecast looked good. No storms, just cold nights. We parked at a small gravel lot near the trailhead. There were only 2 other vehicles there, which meant the forest was practically empty. Perfect. We packed our gear and started hiking. The trail cut through thick pine woods where the sunlight barely touched the ground. Snow crunched under our boots as we moved deeper into the forest. After about 2 hours of hiking, we found a clearing near a small frozen creek. It looked like the perfect campsite. Tall trees around us, plenty of space for a tent, and the creek nearby for water if we needed it. We dropped our packs and started setting up. By the time the sun began to set, the fire was burning and the tent was up. The forest slowly turned dark around us. Camping at night in the mountains is a strange kind of quiet. There are sounds, but they're far away. Branches cracking in the distance, wind moving through the trees, sometimes an owl, but mostly silence. We sat around the fire for a while eating canned soup and talking about random stuff. Work, old college stories, plans for future trips, nothing unusual. Around 10 p.m. we decided to turn in. The temperature had dropped fast and our breath hung in the air like fog. We crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and turned off our headlamps. Inside the tent, it was warm enough in our sleeping bags. For a while, everything felt normal. The wind moved through the trees. The fire outside slowly burned down, and eventually I drifted off to sleep. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, but something had changed. At first I thought it was just the cold. Then I heard it, a crunch, outside the tent. Snow being stepped on. I stayed still in my sleeping bag, listening. Crunch, another step, slow, deliberate. Mart must have heard it too because I felt him shift slightly beside me. Neither of us spoke. The footsteps continued, moving around the tent. Not fast, not running, just walking, slowly circling us. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe an elk. Animals wander through campsites all the time, but animals don't usually move like that. This sounded careful, like whoever or whatever was out there was trying to stay quiet. The footsteps stopped behind the tent. For a few seconds there was nothing but the sound of wind in the trees. Then something brushed against the side of the tent. The fabric pressed inward for a moment, like something leaning against it. Mark whispered quietly, "Tyler, you awake? Yeah. You hear that?" Before I could answer, the footsteps started again, but this time they were closer, right beside the tent, walking slowly, circling again. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The footsteps didn't sound heavy, and they didn't sound like hooves. They sounded like bare feet. Soft, flat, crunching slowly through the snow. Neither of us moved. Neither of us wanted to look outside. After about a minute, the footsteps stopped again, right at the front of the tent, the zipper side. And then something crouched down. I could see the shadow through the thin fabric as the moonlight passed behind it. A shape, human-sized, just sitting there, on the other side of the tent, watching us. Mark whispered again, "Is that a person?" Before I could respond, the shadow slowly moved closer to the tent wall, and a hand pressed against the fabric, 5 long fingers pushing into the material from the outside. But something about the hand looked wrong. The fingers were too long, too thin, and the nails, they looked dark, almost black. Then the hand slowly dragged downward across the tent wall, making a slow scraping sound along the fabric. Mark sucked in a quiet breath beside me. Outside, the footsteps started again, but this time they were moving away from the tent, into the trees. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The forest swallowed the sound until everything was quiet again. Neither of us slept for the rest of the night. We just lay there in the dark, listening, waiting, and around 3 a.m., the footsteps came back. Neither of us slept after that. The forest outside our tent had gone completely still. No wind moving through the trees, no animals, no distant sounds, just silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the woods themselves are holding their breath. Mark shifted beside me inside his sleeping bag. "You think it's gone?" he whispered. I stared at the dark ceiling of the tent. "I don't know." For a long time we didn't hear anything. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. It was hard to tell. When you're lying in the dark, waiting for something to happen, time starts to stretch in strange ways. I remember slowly starting to believe that maybe it really had been an animal, maybe a curious deer. Maybe we had just imagined the shape, imagined the hand. But then the sound came back. Crunch, a single step in the snow. Both of us froze instantly. Brunch, another step. This time it sounded farther away, somewhere in the trees. Mark slowly turned his head toward me. "It's back," he whispered. The footsteps moved slowly through the woods, not circling the tent this time, just walking. But they were getting closer. The sound stopped again, just a few feet away from the tent. I held my breath. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then the side of the tent suddenly pressed inward again. Harder this time. Something leaned against it. The fabric stretched tight, and the shadow appeared again. But this time the shape was clearer in the moonlight. It was crouching, right next to the tent wall. Its head tilted slightly, like it was trying to listen. Mark slowly reached for the flashlight beside his sleeping bag. I grabbed his wrist. "Don't," I whispered. If it was a person, we didn't want to provoke them. If it wasn't a person, I didn't want to know. Outside, the shape moved. The shadow slowly stood up. For a moment, the outline was tall, taller than a normal person. Then it stepped away. The footsteps started circling the tent again, slowly, carefully, like it was studying us. Mark whispered again, "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer, because something about the way it moved felt wrong. Animals wander, animals sniff around, but this thing, it was pacing, like it was thinking, like it was waiting. The footsteps stopped behind the tent again. Then came a new sound, scratching, a long, dragging scratch across the fabric, like fingernails sliding slowly across the tent wall. The sound moved from one side to the other, slow, deliberate. Mark covered his mouth with his hand. Neither of us dared move. The scratching stopped near the zipper of the tent, right at the entrance. For a moment there was nothing. Then something pressed against the zipper from the outside. The metal teeth rattled slightly, not opening, just testing. Like someone feeling for the weak point. My heart started pounding so hard I thought the thing outside would hear it. The zipper moved half an inch, then stopped. Then came a sound that I will never forget. Breathing. Right outside the tent, slow, wet, too close. Mark leaned toward me and whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "Tyler, there are no footprints from earlier, right?" The question hit me like ice water. When we went to sleep, the ground outside had been covered in fresh snow, untouched, which meant if something had been walking around our tent, there should be tracks everywhere. But we hadn't checked yet. Outside, the breathing continued, slow, patient. Then something tapped the tent pole, once, twice, 3 times, each tap soft but deliberate, like a signal. Then the breathing stopped, and the footsteps moved away again. This time they faded deeper into the forest, farther away, until the sound disappeared completely. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Finally, Mark spoke. "What if it's someone messing with us?" I shook my head even though he probably couldn't see it in the dark. No one would hike out here in the middle of the night just to do that. The forest stayed silent for another hour. Eventually, the sky outside began to turn a faint gray. Morning was coming. When the sun finally started rising through the trees, we slowly unzipped the tent. Cold air rushed inside. The campsite looked exactly the same as it had the night before. The fire pit, our backpacks, the frozen creek nearby, everything still, everything quiet. For a moment I almost convinced myself that the entire night had been in our heads, until Mark stepped outside the tent and suddenly stopped. He stared down at the snow. "Tyler," my stomach tightened. "What?" He didn't answer. He just pointed. I climbed out of the tent and looked down. At first I didn't see it, Then I realized why. The snow around our campsite was covered in footprints. Hundreds of them, but they weren't animal tracks. And they weren't boot prints. They were human footprints. Bare human footprints. Circling the tent, over and over again. Dozens of loops around the campsite. But that wasn't the worst part. The footprints were wrong. Each one had 5 toes. But the toes were too long, and the heel was narrow, almost pointed, like the foot had been stretched. Mark slowly turned in a circle looking at the ground. The tracks covered almost the entire clearing. Whoever or whatever made them had been walking around us all night, watching, waiting. But then Mark noticed something else. "Tyler, look." The footprints circled the tent many times, but none of them led into the forest, and none of them led out. They simply stopped, right beside the tent. Like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. The cold air suddenly felt much colder. Mark looked at me. "Let's pack up." Neither of us argued. We moved fast, stuffing our gear into our backpacks without even cooking breakfast. Within 15 minutes, we were back on the trail heading toward the parking lot. Neither of us spoke much. Every snapped twig in the woods made us look over our shoulders. Every movement between the trees made my chest tighten. It took about 2 hours to reach the trailhead. When we finally stepped into the parking area, I felt a huge wave of relief. My truck was still there, so were the other 2 vehicles. But something immediately felt wrong. One of the cars had its driver's door open, just hanging there. Snow had drifted halfway into the seat, like it had been open all night. Mark walked closer to it. "Maybe someone left in a hurry," he said. But then he stopped. "What?" I asked. He pointed toward the ground beside the car. There were footprints in the snow. Bare footprints. The same long, narrow ones we had seen at the campsite. They led away from the car and into the forest. But there were no footprints coming toward the car. Only away. Mark and I looked at each other. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. Whatever had been walking around our tent that night had come from somewhere near the trailhead, and it had been in the forest long before we arrived. We drove back to Denver that afternoon without speaking much. Neither of us ever went camping in that forest again. But the part that still bothers me the most is something I noticed a week later when I was cleaning my gear at home. My tent had a long scratch in the fabric, right near the zipper. A deep mark, like something sharp, had dragged across it, and inside the scratch there were tiny black flakes, like dried skin, or maybe old fingernails. To this day, no one knows what was walking around our tent that night. My friend Lucas and I had taken a week off work to hike part of the Olympic National Forest in northern Washington state. The plan was simple: 3 days hiking in, 2 days camping near an alpine lake, then 3 days hiking back out. We had done trips like that before. Both of us loved getting away from the city. No traffic, no phones, just miles of forest. The first day went perfectly. The trail was quiet and mostly empty. We passed a couple of other hikers during the morning, but by afternoon we hadn't seen anyone for hours. Tall evergreen trees surrounded the trail in every direction. Sunlight filtered through the branches in thin beams that barely reached the forest floor. It smelled like wet earth and pine, the kind of place that feels peaceful the moment you step into it. By late afternoon, we reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. Down below, we could see miles of untouched forests stretching toward distant mountains. Lucas stopped and took a picture. "This is why we come out here," he said. I agreed. It felt good to be somewhere that quiet. We camped that night beside a narrow creek about 8 miles from the trailhead. Nothing unusual happened, just the sound of water moving over rocks and wind passing through the trees. The next morning we packed up and continued deeper into the forest. By midday the trail started to change. It became narrower, less maintained. Branches hung lower over the path, and fallen trees forced us to climb around them. We checked the map. The trail was still marked, but it clearly didn't see much use anymore. Lucas laughed. "Guess we picked the unpopular route." I didn't mind. If anything, it made the trip better. But around 3 in the afternoon, we noticed something strange. Smoke, very faint, drifting through the trees ahead. At first, we thought it might be another group of campers somewhere nearby. That wasn't unusual. Even remote trails sometimes had people. But the closer we got, the stranger it felt. There was no sound, no voices, no movement, just a faint smell of wood smoke in the air. Lucas walked a little faster. Maybe there's a campsite up ahead. The trail curved slightly downhill, and the trees opened into a small clearing. And that's when we saw it. A campsite, right in the middle of the clearing. A fire pit still full of glowing red embers. A large green tent standing nearby, 2 folding camping chairs, and a lantern hanging from a low branch. The lantern was still on. Its yellow light flickered softly even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. Lucas stopped beside me. "That's weird," he said. I nodded slowly, because the campsite looked active. Like someone had just stepped away. A metal pot sat over the fire pit, steam still rising from inside it. There was even a backpack leaning against a tree, but the clearing was completely empty. Lucas called out, "Hello?" His voice echoed through the trees. No answer. He tried again. "Hey, anyone here?" Still nothing. The forest around the clearing stayed perfectly quiet. I walked a few steps closer to the fire pit. The embers were definitely fresh. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. Lucas walked toward the tin. Maybe they went down to a creek or something. But as he got closer, he slowed down. Dan? What? You should look at this." I walked over beside him. The tent flap was open. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, still laid out, a flashlight, a pair of boots, and a phone lying on the ground. The phone screen was cracked, but it was still on. The battery indicator showed 20%. Lucas picked it up carefully. "No signal," he said. "Try calling someone." He opened the call screen. There was only one recent number dialed. Emergency services, 911. The call time read 3 seconds. Lucas and I looked at each other. The forest suddenly felt colder. "Maybe something scared them off," he said. "Or maybe they left to get help." But something about that explanation didn't feel right. Because if someone left in a hurry, they wouldn't leave everything behind. Their gear, their boots, their phone. Lucas walked slowly around the campsite. "That fire was lit not long ago." He pointed toward the edge of the clearing. "Look." I followed his gaze. There were footprints in the dirt, 2 different sets, both heading toward the trees on the far side of the clearing. Lucas started walking toward them. "Let's see where they go." I hesitated for a moment. Something in my gut told me not to follow those tracks. But curiosity won. We stepped out of the clearing and into the forest. The footprints continued between the trees for about 20 yards. Then something strange happened. The track stopped. Just ended. Lucas crouched down. "That's impossible." The dirt ahead was undisturbed. No more footprints. No signs of turning around. No broken branches. No dragged marks. Nothing. It looked like the 2 people had simply vanished. Right there between the trees, Lucas stood up slowly. "Okay, that's creepy." I didn't say anything, because that's when I noticed something else. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. And then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, we heard a voice, very faint, very far away. "Hello?" Lucas and I both turned toward the sound. It was coming from the direction the footprints had stopped. A man's voice, weak, almost like he was out of breath. "Hello," Lucas whispered. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. The voice came again, but this time it sounded different. Not closer, not farther, just wrong, like the sound was echoing through the trees in a strange way. Lucas called back, "Hey, we're here. Do you need help?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then the voice spoke again, but this time, it sounded exactly like Lucas. "Hey, we're here. Do you need help?" Lucas's face went pale. Because he hadn't spoken, the voice had copied him. Perfectly, word for word, from somewhere deep in the forest. Lucas and I stood there in the trees, staring into the dark forest ahead of us. Neither of us moved. The voice had sounded exactly like him. Same tone, same words, same rhythm. But Lucas hadn't said anything. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lucas whispered quietly, "You heard that too, right?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah." The forest ahead was completely still. Tall trees stood packed together so tightly that the light barely reached the ground. Everything past 20 or 30 feet faded into shadow. Lucas cleared his throat. "Hello?" he called again. His voice echoed between the trees. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, the voice came back. "Hello?" Exactly the same. Same pitch, same echo. Lucas looked at me. "That's not funny." But neither of us were laughing. The sound hadn't been distorted like a normal echo. It had been repeated, like something had listened to and then played the sound back. We both slowly stepped backward toward the clearing. I kept my eyes on the trees. Something about the forest felt different now, heavy, like the woods were listening. When we reached the edge of the clearing, Lucas turned and walked quickly back toward the campsite. "Okay," he said quietly. "Something's not right here." I didn't argue. The abandoned camp looked exactly the same as before. The lantern still flickered softly from the branch. The pot still sat over the fire, steam still drifting upward, but the place felt colder now. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. "What do you think happened to those people?" I looked around the clearing. Their gear was still here, their sleeping bags, their chairs, even their food supplies. No one leaves a campsite like that unless something forces them to. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't like that voice." Lucas nodded. "Yeah, me neither." For a few minutes we just stood there thinking. The sun had started dropping behind the trees, turning the clearing darker by the minute. Eventually, Lucas said something that made sense. "We should probably stay here tonight." I looked at him. "You want to camp here?" He shrugged. "It's already getting late, and if those people come back, we should be here in case they need help." He wasn't wrong, but something about staying in that clearing felt wrong. Still, hiking deeper into the forest after dark wasn't a good idea either. So we decided to set up our tent at the edge of the clearing, not inside the abandoned campsite, but close enough that we could see it, just in case. We worked quickly. The sky darkened fast beneath the tall trees. By the time we finished setting up our tent, the forest was already slipping into night. Lucas lit a small fire using some extra wood near the pit. We didn't touch any of the missing campers' equipment. Something about it felt personal, like we were intruding. The fire crackled softly as the darkness thickened around the clearing. For a while, everything seemed normal again. Just two friends sitting beside a fire in the woods. Lucas opened a can of soup and heated it over the flames. "You think we should report this when we get back?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "probably." He nodded. "People don't just disappear like that." The forest around us stayed quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. Eventually, Lucas stood up. "I'm gonna check something." "What?" "The tracks we followed earlier." He grabbed his flashlight. "I just want to see if they show up again somewhere." I hesitated. "You want me to come?" He shook his head. "Nah, I'll just be a minute." Then he walked toward the trees. His flashlight beam disappeared into the darkness. I stayed by the fire, listening, watching the abandoned campsite across the clearing. The lantern still flickered. The tent still stood open. Nothing moved. About 5 minutes passed, then 10. Lucas still hadn't come back. I stood up. "Lucas?" My voice sounded small in the clearing. No answer. I tried again. "Lucas." The forest swallowed the sound. I grabbed my own flashlight and walked toward the trees where he had gone. "Lucas, stop messing around." Still nothing. I stepped into the woods. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, lighting up trunks and branches. The ground was covered in needles and dirt. I looked for footprints. Then I saw something. Fresh tracks. Lucas's boot prints, leading deeper into the forest. I followed them. The beam of my flashlight bounced between the trees as I walked. The forest felt thicker here, darker. And then I heard something. A voice. "Dan?" I froze. It was Lucas, but it sounded far away. "Lucas," I called. The voice came again. "Dan?" This time it sounded closer. Relief rushed through me. "Where are you?" No answer. Then suddenly the voice came again, right behind me. "Where are you?" I spun around. My flashlight beam swept through empty trees. No one there. My chest tightened, because the voice had sounded exactly like me. My own voice, my own words, repeating back from the darkness. "Where are you?" The words echoed again from deeper in the forest. Then another voice joined it. Lucas's voice. "Dan," then mine again. "Where are you?" The sounds bounced through the trees, over and over, like the forest itself was learning how we sounded. My heart started racing. "Lucas," I shouted. Silence. Then footsteps, slow, heavy, somewhere ahead of me. Not Lucas's footsteps. Something bigger. Branches cracked softly, moving between the trees, watching, listening. And then, very quietly, in Lucas's voice, it whispered, "Dan, help me." My blood ran cold. Because I realized something. The voice didn't sound scared. It sounded curious, like it was practicing, learning. And then the trees ahead of me moved, just slightly. Something tall shifted behind the trunks. Something that definitely wasn't human. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed toward the movement. The voice came again, perfectly calm, perfectly clear, in Lucas's exact voice. "Dan, come here." And that's when I ran. I ran all the way back to the clearing without looking back. My lungs burned by the time I reached the fire. But the moment I stepped into the clearing, I stopped. Because Lucas was standing there, right beside the fire, looking at me, confused. "Where the hell did you go?" he asked. I stared at him. "You were in the woods." He shook his head. "No, I wasn't. I came back 5 minutes ago." My stomach dropped. "Lucas, I followed your footprints." He looked down at his boots, then back at me. I never left the clearing. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The fire crackled softly between us, and from somewhere deep in the forest, a voice called out, "Dan, perfectly, exactly, like Lucas." To this day, no one knows what happened to the campers who owned that abandoned campsite. When Lucas and I reported it later, the park rangers searched the area for 2 days. They found the clearing, they found the gear, but they never found the 2 people who had been camping there. No bodies, no tracks, nothing. This happened 2 summers ago when my friends and I went camping in the mountains. There were 4 of us: Jake, Aaron, Chris, and me. We picked a spot far from the main campground, about a mile into the woods. No cabins, no rangers nearby, just trees, a small clearing, and a narrow dirt trail leading in. It felt safe. We'd camped before, built a fire, cooked food, joked around like always. By midnight, the fire had died down to glowing embers, and the forest had gone completely quiet. Too quiet. Around 2 a.m. I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. A woman screaming. It came from deep in the woods. "Help me." I sat up instantly. For a second I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again. Louder this time. Desperate. "Please, help me." Jake woke up next to me. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. Aaron unzipped his sleeping bag, his voice low. That sounded real. Chris was already grabbing his flashlight. "Someone's out there." The scream came again. Closer now. Like she was running. Like she was being chased. None of us said it out loud, but we all thought the same thing. Someone needed help. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out of the tent. The forest was pitch black. Only our beams cut through the darkness. The screaming came again. "Help-a-me!" This time, it sounded like it was just ahead of us, maybe 50 yards into the trees. Chris didn't hesitate. "Come on!" We followed him. Branches snapped under our feet as we moved through the forest. Our lights bounced across tree trunks, shadows stretching and twisting in every direction. "Keep yelling," Jake shouted. "We're coming." For a moment, there was silence. Then the scream came again. But this time, it was farther away. Much farther. Like she had suddenly moved deeper into the woods. We stopped. "That's weird," Aaron said. "She was just right there." Chris frowned. "Maybe she's running." Jake shook his head. "No way someone moves that fast in the dark." We stood there listening. Then the scream came again, even farther now. Faint, but still clear. "Help! Me!" My stomach tightened, because something about it felt wrong. Not the words, not the voice, just the distance. It didn't sound like someone running anymore. It sounded like something pulling us. Chris stepped forward again. "She's getting away. We have to go." I grabbed his arm. "Wait." He looked at me. "What?" "Listen." We stood still. The forest around us was silent again. No wind, no animals, nothing. And then from somewhere behind us, right back near our camp, the woman screamed again, loud, clear, much closer than before. All 4 of us turned at the same time. "That's not possible," Jake whispered. We had just come from that direction. There was no way she could have gotten behind us. Chris slowly backed up. "Okay, that's not normal." The scream came again. But this time, it changed, just slightly. Still a woman, still crying for help, but the tone felt off, like the emotion didn't match the words. "Please, help me," flat, Almost. Practiced. Aaron's voice dropped. We should go back. No one argued. We started walking quickly toward the clearing, but something felt wrong immediately. The trees looked different, denser, closer together. The path we came from didn't look familiar anymore. Are we going the right way? Jake asked. I think so, Chris said, but he didn't sound sure. Then the scream came again, right in front of us, so close it made us all flinch. Help-a-me. We froze, because this time we saw where it came from. Between the trees ahead, there was movement. Something standing there, tall, still, hidden just enough in the darkness that we couldn't see it clearly. I raised my flashlight. The beam hit the trees, but whatever was there stepped back, just out of the light. The voice came again, exactly the same. Same words, same tone, like it hadn't changed at all. Please help me, Jake whispered. That's not a person. No one disagreed. We started backing away slowly, step by step, not turning our backs. The thing in the trees didn't move, but it didn't leave either. It just stayed there, watching. Then it screamed again, but this time, it wasn't just one voice. There were two. The same voice layered over itself, perfectly in sync. Help, M-E, help, M. My chest tightened, because I realized something. It wasn't calling for help. It was repeating, learning. We turned and ran. Branches whipped against us as we pushed through the trees, not caring about direction anymore. We just needed to get back. The screams followed us. Left, right, behind. Every direction at once. Please, help me, help me, help me. Different distances, same voice, over and over. By the time we broke into the clearing, I could barely breathe. The camp was still there, exactly how we left it. The dying fire, the tent, everything. But the moment we stepped into the open, the scream stopped, completely. Silence hit us like a wall. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. We stood there, gasping for air. Jake turned slowly. It's gone. Chris shook his head. No, it's still there. We all looked toward the tree line, dark, still, watching, but nothing moved. We didn't sleep that night. We sat by the fire until sunrise, adding wood every few minutes just to keep the light alive. No one spoke much. Around 6 a.m. we packed everything and left. We didn't even eat. We just walked and walked until we reached the main road. Later that day, we told a ranger what happened. He listened quietly, didn't interrupt, didn't laugh. When we finished, he just nodded slowly. Then he said something that still stays with me. There's a reason we tell people not to follow voices at night. Jake asked him what he meant. The ranger looked out toward the trees and said, because sometimes it's not someone trying to be found. He paused, then added quietly, it's something trying to make sure you don't leave. To this day, none of us can explain what we heard that night.